Right, I'm just admitting people as well. Well, hello, everybody. Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for coming to our event, which is the role of women in national and international security, leading to poverty alleviation. My name's Juliet Coleman. I'm the Director of Security Women, and I will pass over to my colleague, Barbara Cleary, who is the Chair of Security Women.
Thank you, Juliet. Hello and welcome from me too. And I know we're all around the world, so wherever we are, I'll say the same. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever we may be. But we're really pleased to have you all join us today. I'm Barbara Cleary and I'm the Chair of Security Women and I'm the moderator for today. And you can see my bio on the platform. There is also information on our platform about Security Women and on the CSW platform about Security Women. So you can read some more about us and there's a link to our website if you want to find out more. And I hope that, you after today, if you're not joined us already in terms of following us, that you will do so in the future. We are an advocacy and research organisation and we're calling for the inclusion of women in security sector reform around the world. And we welcome the focus of this commission for CSW on the accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. I just thought there was going to be an echo then, but I think it's gone away. We have put information on the event page setting out our thinking around the connections between poverty and security. And I'd like to make a couple of observations now in terms of introducing our event and getting us started. At Security Women, we recognise that ensuring the equal participation of women in security sector roles and security sector reform has the potential to alleviate poverty for women and girls and is crucial in the acceleration of the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. High levels of unemployment, we know, is a contributory factor to poverty, and even more so for women. By making concrete efforts to increase the recruitment and participation of women in the security sector, new avenues of potential income for women could be part of the solution. Security Women promotes the importance of increasing the participation of women and employment of women in security sector institutions, and we are asking for 50%. Women are 50% plus of the population, and therefore, why not? Shouldn't there be parity in security sector institutions? And let me see, security institutions are trusted to protect communities, both nationally and internationally. And to do this, they must be inclusive and they must be approachable. It is vitally important that women and girls see themselves represented in the institutions who are there to protect and serve them. It is also an opportunity for their empowerment. With gender inequality often a cause of poverty, witnessing women in positions of authority and power can help to erode the preconceived ideas about the future for women and girls and address gender stereotyping. Equally important is the need for the security sector institutions to provide safe places for women to work. At Security Women, we have been dismayed over the last years at the recent reports of sexual violence and the gender-based discrimination that is occurring in security institutions around the world. On one level, it is necessary that women can participate, so they need a safe place to work. And on the other hand, the communities need to be able to trust the people that they're looking to keep them safe. Women must have the ability to participate in security sector reform on an equal footing to their male counterparts. And this will require the incorporation of a gender perspective in all aspects of the operation in any organisation to remove the barriers that are preventing this happening. And today, we're going to take a deeper dive into looking at some of those obstacles that prevent more women working in the security sector, the important roles that they have to play in security, and how we can support more women to move into the critical leadership roles. Because without being able to influence and shape things, then we can't have the impact that we need to have in terms of creating the world that we all want to live in. So together during this session, I hope that we're going to come up with some solutions that in time will dramatically change the landscape and the representation of women in a wide variety of roles in the security sector, and why it is important that we, all of us together, advocate for this change. Now, to do this, we are joined by two incredible women. Rebecca Weiner, who is the Deputy Commissioner, Intelligence and Counterterrorism at the New York City Police Department, and Jackie Acker, Deputy Privacy and Civil Liberties Officer at the Central Intelligence Agency. Welcome and a big thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to have you with us. I will leave them to tell you a little bit more about themselves in a moment. In the meantime, the format for today's session is I am going to discuss with Jackie and Rebecca a number of questions, and then we're going to open up the floor for all of you to join us and ask your questions and participate in the conversation. So start thinking about what you'd like to ask. You can either put your questions in the chat, or you can wait for the open forum session, and then you can raise your hand using the raise hand function. Please introduce yourself and say where you're from, and be brief in asking your questions or making your comments, so that we give everybody airtime in terms of the little time that we have for this event, and it's important that everybody gets a chance to be able to make their contribution. So we will do our very best to answer all of your questions, and if we can't, then we will follow up afterwards if there's any that are left unanswered. We're also recording this event, so we hope to be able to put it on the website. So for those that are unable to join us, they'll be able to listen in later. Okay, so let's get started. And I'm going to come to you first, Rebecca. And I'd like you to tell us or give us some insight into your career, the organisation you're working for. And I'll be really interested to know that what inspired you to do the work that you do, and what keeps you going in this really challenging world we live in.
It is a challenging world, and all of this keeps me going, and all the engagement that we do at the NYPD with quite a large variety of audiences on a large variety of topics, which keeps us on our toes and interested. But thank you, first of all. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Juliet. It is a pleasure to be here today. I only rue the fact that there's both so much that doing talks on Zoom allows you to do and reach around the world. But I do love a talk like this in person, because this really is about building relationships between people. So I am delighted to meet all of you over in cyberspace. And one time, maybe we'll all be in a room together talking about these really important issues. I am the Deputy Commissioner for Intelligence and Counterterrorism at the NYPD, New York City Police Department, and I've been in this particular role overseeing our Intelligence and Counterterrorism Bureau since this summer, but have been at the NYPD since 2006. My background is in counterterrorism, so I oversaw our counterterrorism investigations program for around a decade and helped build out our intelligence analysis shop. And a lot of things drew me to the department and to the work, but many of them are very core to what brings us together here. And it's the culture of our department and the culture of our industry. And sorry, we have a hot mic from iPad 3. Who I hope will ask a question later on in the talk. But a number of things. I come from New Mexico, and my family was involved in the Manhattan Project, and that was a big source of influence for me to become interested in and do work related to national security broadly. My grandmother was very close to me as a child growing up, and had a huge influence on shaping my career. She was involved herself, but on the periphery of the Manhattan Project, not as a scientist, but on the domestic side, creating a life for my mother growing up and chronicling our family's history as it was happening and afterwards. And so she really directed me without knowing it at the time, and I think without intending to, into national security as a domain. And then after 9/11, as was the case with many of my peers in the counterterrorism world, was very inspired to get involved in the fight somehow. And how wasn't quite clear. I went to law school and then did a fellowship after law school looking at national security policy issues around weapons of mass destruction, around other topics, but attended what turned out to be a very fortuitous lecture by our former police commissioner, Ray Kelly, who was in the process of building a counterterrorism capability within NYPD that would work alongside international, federal, state, and local counterparts protecting the city. And it sounded extremely compelling in a way to channel an overall interest in national security issues that was focusing on counterterrorism work into protecting very directly the streets that I lived in New York. And it sounded like a great way to try to understand at the root these issues that we've been living through for decades. And so I went up to him afterwards and I said, I'm interested in working for the NYPD. Is there any role for somebody like me to play? I'm a lawyer, I'm interested in these issues. And the bureaucracy of the NYPD, which is 50,000 men and women, is quite dynamic, actually, as it turns out. And I was working here 8 weeks later as an intelligence analyst and worked my way up from the very basic intelligence analysis level to now being the deputy commissioner. And in part did it from hard work, from demonstrated, expertise in the domain, but also because of these incredibly important networks, not just of women, certainly. In our department, we're currently at 20.9% female, which includes uniform and civilian, but networks of people who helped along the way. And so incredibly important as women are rising through the ranks to make sure that they're turning around and helping others follow in their stead. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. I picked up on the point you made that all of these things we do is about hard work in terms of pushing through and getting there. It's about hard work. Okay, Jackie, over to you.
So, I had to echo what Rebecca said, that conversations like this are also what keep me going. So thank you to all of you for being here and being part of the discussion. And thanks to the UN and to Juliet and Barbara for making sure we can have this dialogue. My background cannot be more different than Rebecca's, except that we both went to law school. So I do want to talk a little bit about my non-traditional background so that you can understand that really anybody can be part of law enforcement and intelligence without having a dedicated education in this area. So I'm from a small town outside Dallas, Texas. Growing up, I knew nobody in law enforcement or intelligence. I didn't even really think about either of those as a possible job when I grew up. I studied theater at the University of Texas at Austin with a focus in scenic design. So for those of you who don't know what that is, when you go see a play and there's a backdrop and props and costumes and set pieces, I helped make all of those. So it's a very rigorous process. And I had to learn technical skills for how to actually do all of that. But more importantly, I had to work with a team to put on each production. And you have to understand a vision for what the end goal is. It's like it literally is in somebody's head. And then through all these different processes, they're able to communicate that out to a team. And then the team works together and each in their own little, does their own piece with their own expertise to build something bigger and to build a show. And then you have several runnings of the show. And then after the last one, you tear it all down and you start all over again. So while I was in that program, one of my dear friend's father had died due to a very preventable medical error. And the injustice of all of it just made me really think about like what I could do to help. And that's what drove me to become a lawyer, and specifically to study healthcare law and bioethics at the University of Tulsa under my dear friend and professor, Marguerite Chapman. So Professor Chapman's classes, they completely changed the way that I think. So they focused on ethical dilemmas, legal gray areas, but also on underprivileged populations and how representation matters in healthcare. So patients often do not have as much power in their positions as providers in that setting. So some of that may be sounding familiar to the conversation at hand, but in that class, I mean, we learned about everything from the Tuskegee experiments, where Black men were allowed to suffer from syphilis, even though it was curable, because scientists wanted to study the course of the disease, to other different bioethical issues. And it really just, as I said before, changed the way that I think. And one of the important questions that it always made me think about is, who does this rule benefit? Who may not benefit? So although those two experiences may not seem like they would have prepared me for a career working in intelligence, they really did, more because they taught me how to work in a team and taught me how to think about other people and different populations that maybe I wouldn't encounter otherwise. I applied to CIA actually because a friend said, hey, we're hiring lawyers for data protection work. And I thought that sounded really interesting. So when I had that offer, I'd actually had another offer as well. And I told my then boss, David, hey, I have this offer from CIA. It looks like a good opportunity, but I really want to work for you. Like, what should I do? And he had actually served in the Navy as an attorney, and he's the one who encouraged me to go work for the government. And he said, there's no better experience than serving your country. So I went and did that. And I didn't know anything about CIA when I started. So some people they know from the time that they're a kid that they want to go work for the CIA. I did not so much as watch a James Bond movie growing up. So I was like the opposite of all of those people. I didn't know anything when I started. So I had to seek out mentors who helped me understand how to be effective, how to improve my skills. And that really helped me rise quickly through the ranks until I finally landed in my current office working on protecting privacy and civil liberties. So that's kind of a long story, but the basic point is, if you have any interest in serving in a security role, I really encourage you to find a way to bring the skills that you have into that world, because there's something for everybody. We really need people of all different backgrounds, all demographics, to work at these institutions to help make the world a safer place. And then when you do find the right fit, it's very rewarding. So if a theater major with a law degree in healthcare can go on to do this work, I'm really confident that you can too. I think the really important thing is having an open mind and being willing to learn instead of knowing everything going in. And on what keeps me going, I would say my team. I'm really lucky. My team is like a family. So every day we go to work with the goal of protecting privacy and protecting civil liberties and building that into our intelligence missions. That's always stimulating, especially when you have new technologies like AI presenting novel challenges in the policy space. But one of the more important things is just that we make time and really make it purposeful to leverage the different experiences on our team to tackle these issues and get different viewpoints. So that makes it really fun for me to go to work every day.
Thank you, Jackie. That's music to my ears, because I'm a huge fan of teamwork, and it really is important that we work as teams and that everybody is included in that team and has a role to play, and it's inclusive. And that is really important if we're going to be successful. And the other point you make, which is really important to me, and that is mentors. We really do need our mentors on board, and we need a variety of mentors, not just necessarily one, but we need different people that are there supporting us in terms of our whatever jobs we may be doing. So that's that. So thank you for that, Jackie. Given that where you kind of take the conversation, I'm going to stay with you and move on to our next question. And that is that, again, picking up on the fact that we're living in a world that is absolutely full of challenges, huge challenges. And what I'd like to know is why you think it's important for women to work in security, defense, or intelligence. Why is it important that we're there?
Rebecca, do you want to start?
Oh, I thought you
I
were.
was gonna
Oh,
stay with you,
for
Jacqueline.
me?
Then
Oh,
I'll
sure.
come
Okay.
to Rebecca.
So I think it's, there's two major reasons. I mean, there's multiple, but I'm going to just focus on two. I think number one is employing more women. It, leads to more women with steady jobs. So even though, we're still working on getting more women in higher ranking positions, making decisions and making more money, overall raising that bar for having women in these secure and steady jobs is really important to poverty alleviation. But then I think the secondary one, and this is a bigger issue in my personal opinion, is that it leads to a safer world. So having representation by women in the rooms where policy and action decisions are made is critical to ensuring equity. It ensures women's voices are heard, and it makes sure that the diversity of thought leads to improved outcomes for people who may not otherwise be thought of. So women are generally more likely to consider impacts of security on female populations and potentially even on other minority populations just because of their own world experiences. So for those two reasons, I think it's really important for women to work in security and defense and intelligence.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Can I come across to you, Rebecca? And
Sure, absolutely. No, I completely agree. And it's really interesting to see, this law enforcement is traditionally quite male dominated, and that's definitely true on the uniform side. I'm a civilian. And if you look at the NYPD, it's a tremendously diverse organization. We speak dozens of languages natively, hail from over 100 countries, and reflect the diversity of the city really well. And the civilian population in our department are, for the most part, doing very different kinds of work from the intelligence analysis that I started the department doing. And that is incredibly diverse, also female dominated pretty dramatically. So you've got around 65% women civilians in our department, which people don't really know. On the uniform side, it's not the case, although we're trying quite hard to promote women up through the ranks and have done a good job of putting women in the positions at the top, and are trying quite hard to bring more women in as line police officers, but then support them along the way, because it's that middle bit where things get really tricky. For us as intelligence analysts and officers, what is really important as a bedrock skill set are communication skills, the teamwork we were talking about, interest in and ability to summon and integrate different viewpoints. That's core to what we do. So being able to work with people who come from a totally different background and experience set from you, theater majors even, is so important. And we do that really well. And we do that really well as an intelligence field writ large, not just the NYPD, but as a whole community. And in law enforcement, and it's interesting because despite the fact that these fields have been traditionally male dominated, the people who do really well in them exhibit traits which are often second nature to women. So the team building, the viewpoints, the making sure we're looking at things from 360 degrees, the inclusivity. I don't want to stereotype all women. Certainly that isn't characteristic of everyone, but it is characteristic of a lot of studies have shown organizations that have female dominated leadership do really well in those domains. So it's actually a really natural field. And if it's interest in protecting where you work or your country or your values, as Jackie was just describing, that you want to do a job around, then it's a fantastic career. If you're looking for something that exposes you to really complicated challenges, but gives you the tools to navigate them in a team environment where you're working with people who really treat work as a family rather than just as an avocation. And not to besmirch the private sector at all, because it's incredibly important, obviously. But it's nice to be part of a team whose mission is very core to protecting our way of life and our safety and security. So I think it's actually an incredibly attractive career set for women. And it's really, the challenges are more in the structure of the organizations and how they allow people, men and women, to progress in your life, to encounter challenges around childcare or elder care or other aspects of what happens outside of work in a way that can still allow you to thrive inside the walls of your organization. And that's where we're trying to do work as a city and as a department and as a bureau into keeping people on board, which can be hard.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think that probably takes us on nicely to explore in a bit more detail the obstacles that are preventing women joining. We've talked about it being male dominated and patriarchal. So I take the view that there's probably a lot of mindsets that we've got to change in terms of thinking differently. And I think also, you know, we've got to, you know, the men have got to step up and be champions for changing the workplace. So that's something else that we can perhaps have a look at. But also in terms of the things like childcare that are preventing women joining and doing these jobs. What are the obstacles, and what can we actually do what do we need to do to change the workplace that is going to encourage more women to step in? Or what do we need to do to actually get out there and tell them about these jobs and get them to want to come and work in these organizations? So can I stay with you, Rebecca, on that, and then come to you?
I mean, there's so much that needs to be done in a concerted way over time in order to create the real cultural shifts that have to occur before there's true integration. I think we are making tremendous progress. And I look back over my career, which feels short, but really actually is almost 20 years in this one organization, and see a tremendous amount of change. And some of it is pragmatic around when I had my first child, there was no paid leave for city workers. And now we've got 12 weeks of paid leave.
Perfect.
Okay, and we'll pop it down here and then come and for you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Can I ask, can we ask you to, thank you.
So paid leave for childcare is an obvious one. And that's one where in New York City at the time, the private sector had vastly eclipsed the public sector, and that's changed dramatically. We've had our first female police commissioner, Keeshant Sewell. We have our first deputy commissioner of color, Tanya Kinsella. So we've got all these great firsts in leadership. I happen to be the first woman to have my job as the Deputy Commissioner for Intelligence and Counterterrorism. So real effort to deliberately change the culture of the place. And then a lot of changing norms in society around the need for diversity, and gender diversity is one aspect of it, but also the need for, at times, some flexibility around the structure of work. And that does favor younger women. And so many studies in the pandemic around women taking primary seats back if you have two couples, and the work disruption that the pandemic created fell disproportionately on women. And even here, where we had a real diehard, you must physically be here to do your job mentality, despite the fact that you might be able to do your job remotely some of the time, we've started to change that. So issues around hybrid work schedule can be really helpful if you have small children. And that's obviously not just for women, but does tend to affect women. So, the childcare thing is an obvious one. And that's not just childcare, it's elder care, it's responsibilities outside of the workplace. The cultural piece, subtler, more insidious, and more difficult to tackle by just changing a few policies here and there. And that's one where we really need continued work by both women leaders and men leaders in all aspects of this. Isn't going to change overnight, and it really isn't a matter of a proportion or a statistic or a benchmark that you get to and then everything changes. It's about making sure that you're having people in the roles who are given a voice to change the things internally around culture and policy that they need to. And I will say, last week I was in London, and I've spent time with the Five Eyes community in the intelligence world. And there are really progressive attitudes around gender and diversity in the workplace in Australia and the UK that give us some lessons here that I think we've benefited from. So it's also about spending a lot of time with partners that are doing it well, and understanding how they're speaking and how they've created the cultural shifts that they've had to do over the last few years as well.
No, thank you, Rebecca, for that. That's interesting, and I think the point you make in terms of the childcare and the flexible working options, you know, in terms of encouraging people or enabling people to work more flexibly, that can be a big part of the solution. It's not the solution, but being able to work flexibly, and that's something that in the UK we're about to change. In terms of April, we've got some new legislation coming in. It will enable people to ask for flexible working from their first day of employment. I'm not saying it should be before employment, it should be part of the job offer. But anyway, the new legislation is going to be able to ask from day one, and they've changed the criteria and where the emphasis should be placed in terms of decision making and around whether or not a request for flexible working can be incorporated into the team working. So we're looking forward to that, and we're hoping that might trigger some better working practices around enabling people, not just women but men too, being able to work flexibly and do other things and get a better work-life balance. So can I come to you, Jackie, and maybe you can build on our conversation and let us know what's happening at the CIA and whether there are interesting developments there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely want to build on what Rebecca said. And I think, one of the other barriers that I see, at least, anecdotally with people I know, is that I've seen women also self-select out of positions. So, seeing, and this is for a range of reasons, but maybe they haven't been presented with security jobs as an option, whether that's by mentors, teachers, parents, could even be by their schools, and by Hollywood. So I think a lot of that is shifting in representation in media, and I think that's going to help in future generations. But I also know people who have not applied for jobs because they didn't meet 100% of the qualifications written down. So they don't apply, even if they may have been selected for that position. So I think that that is a barrier, and it's one that I have very much been more cognizant of in my own job, and also in mentoring and sponsoring other people. Women also may not always see examples in real life of leadership in these organizations. So since I have worked at CIA, I got a front row seat to see the first ever female director, Gina Haspel, be sworn in. This meant that an entire generation of women could now see themselves as leaders in a premier intelligence organization. And that was so critical, to people who were already working at CIA, and to people who I know in thinking about actually applying for the first time. Another barrier is that in security roles, I think a lot of people think you have to have a certain background, and some of those backgrounds do tend to be more male dominated, but that really can also be mitigated by education. So educating people about, the multiple types of backgrounds that actually are useful in security, but also improving access to education for women, and by strategically advertising and recruiting from groups like Women in Data Science or the Society of Women in Engineering. There are different ways that you can mitigate some of those by purposely reaching out. And I agree that there is still cultural and societal barriers, with disproportionate roles of caretaking in many cultures done by women. But despite all of those barriers, I also have seen women join in order to break down those barriers. So, an opportunity to serve your community or your country and solve really thorny problems can also be a major motivator for the women I know. So, I think that there are barriers, but I think that we're overcoming them slowly, and we have some mitigations that we can put in place.
Okay, thank you. Can I follow up on with both of you in terms of what's happening in your organizations and how we can encourage more women to come and join the organizations? Can I ask you in terms of initiatives that might be in place that help to support women in terms of taking them in terms of the leadership roles? And we mentioned mentoring, and I know the NYPD, they have a women's college. Is it Winston College? Something I can't remember.
Oh, for the NYPD? Well, no, I thought you were referring to we have a quite robust women's institute.
Women's Institute, that's
okay.
it. I got its name wrong. Sorry.
Yes. And it's great. So we have our Deputy Commissioner for Equity and Inclusion, Wendy Garcia, has been fantastic about kind of where the rubber meets the road, making sure that we have programs in place and we can talk about wanting to identify female leaders within their commands and for promoting them. But what more can we do? And so she put together a Women's Institute, and it's a quite competitive application process. I think they had less than 10% in what's the word? Admission, if you will, to this process. We have 100 women across our department who are selected to spend a year doing mentoring. So they have a female or male executive that they're paired with, and a series of meetings and visits to other places in the department to expose them to the breadth and width of opportunities available here. And if you think about what we need to replicate with the notion of, boys clubs and all these cultural barriers, it's the informal, organic way that younger, traditionally men within an organization have been given opportunities to grow in their careers because of somebody that they know or meet along the way. And so this is an effort to try to equalize that and say, here's what the department has to offer you. And here's a number of people in a community within this department who will progress with you as you grow, who you may meet, who you wouldn't have interacted with, that give you that 360-degree view that I talked about earlier, not in terms of decision-making, but opportunities. So exposing people to opportunities, as obvious as it sounds, is something that is harder if you don't have a network that's established and you're feeling like you're entering into an organization where there are these other centers of gravity around progress that you don't have access to. So that's been really helpful for us. And again, all of the looking outside our department for initiatives from elsewhere, that's very core to what our bureau does. We've got relationships around the world with departments, and we have NYPD officers posted in 13 cities right now around the world, as well as across the United States. And those posts, some of whom are occupied by female officers, a good number actually, are really important for the relationship building and lessons learned of, again, who's doing it well. And I know we're not on questions yet, but I would flag a question that somebody put into the chat because it's such an interesting one around, questioning the premise that just bringing women into intelligence and policing roles will result in a more peaceful society. I really think that is important because we're not necessarily talking about changing the mission of these organizations. And in law enforcement, our mission is public safety, but it certainly is in the security space, and that's true of intelligence agencies. And so when we talk about the need to have female representation, I think it is important to really think through why that is and what that means. And to me, why that is and what that means an organization that does a better job at what that organization does at achieving its mission in a way that avoids a lot of the traps and the pitfalls and the mistakes that an organization, especially one in the intelligence or security or law enforcement space, can make. So in a way, it does make things more peaceful, in my view, not because women are conflict averse or peace oriented per se, but because we will avoid doing the missteps, hopefully. I mean, that's the idea. We have good people of all backgrounds who can help an organization make sure that it's avoiding making missteps that are due to blind spots or poor decision making. So I don't want to overstate the genderization of women as inherently softer and kinder, even though I hope that we're all soft and kind and thoughtful and deliberate and wanting to promote peace. But it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yes, no, I agree. It is a lot more complicated than that. And I know that tends to be when we're looking at stereotyping, women are softer, they have these soft empathizing skills and so on. So they're good for these roles. And that's not what it's about. We can all have those skills,
right.
Those characteristics. It's how we use them, and it's bringing a diverse group of people to the table. Got a problem we've got to solve, and how are we going to do this together? Yeah. So I think that's what's important. Okay, can I come to you, Jackie? Do you have any comparable things to the Women's Institute College in the NYPP do that supports women in terms of progression in the organization into the bigger roles?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about what's been happening at CIA over the last several years, but before I do, I do want to touch on the question in the chat, and I think even further than what was already said, another way that women can contribute specifically is by challenging the ideas of what is security. So security to female populations might mean something different in terms of domestic violence. It might mean something different in terms of having safe access to go to the bathroom in some parts of the world. So I do think that it's important to have representation, not just from women, but across different cultures, to be able to have that conversation about what is security and who stands to benefit from some of these groups. Okay, so moving on to CIA. And thank you for the question. That was a great question. So at CIA and in the intelligence community, I've seen tremendous progress since I've been there over the last 10 years. We still have a long way to go, but at this point, close to half of our workforce are female, and the percentage of women at higher grades and ranks has been increasing. So at one point, I mentioned Director Gina Haspel. She's our previous director. At one point during her tenure, all 5 of the directorate heads, so they're kind of the 5 main organizations in CIA, plus several executive staff officers were women, as well as the general counsel, the director of congressional affairs, and the director of public affairs. So that has all happened just in the last 10 years. And it is also interesting that in 2022, the promotions to the senior intelligence service, so this is kind of the major, general officers of the CIA, that was the most diverse in CIA's 75-year history. We had 47% women and 27% minority get promoted that year, and that actually exceeded the overall population of women and minorities in the workforce. We've had different programs throughout the years that focused on, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've had some that focused on the role of women in leadership. I have to give a little shout out to the former head of that, Sonia Holt, who was really instrumental in getting buy-in from multiple different stakeholders on some of these issues and helping move that conversation forward and have those hard conversations. But a lot of it starts at the top with leadership, and our leadership has been very precise in making it clear that we're expected to have these conversations and, and work on improving any disparities that exist. So because of that, we've continued to have record-breaking achievements in hiring. We had the largest amount of hiring of racial minorities in 2023 since 2008, the largest number of women hired since 1995, as well as the highest number of people with disabilities. So I think that those conversations, are important, but it's more important that it's really meant. And having these resources and networks, I could not emphasize what Rebecca said on that enough, because it's so important, especially for the younger generation, to have, to know somebody who's on the inside and have those communities, and have communities also that strategically invest in young women and others to develop them and develop their skills so that they can enter these professions. Like, that sense of community is not just inside, CIA. It's really, inside the community and the organizations that work alongside us. It's with the military, it's with all of these different groups. So making sure that those networks are there and developing people is really important as well. But there's also, different kinds of media. So we have to be able to reach people where they are. So, I think about the impact that the podcast Iron Butterfly has had, led by two amazing women in the intelligence community. And the goal of that is to educate the public on what the community does, and also have them hear firsthand accounts from high-ranking women in security. So it's really inspiring to have, things in different kinds of media that are reaching different populations as well.
No, that is really important, the point you make in terms of how we actually communicate and engage with the community in terms of what we're doing and listening to what they want from us in terms of what we do. We've mentioned in the conversation so far, we've just talked a little bit about conflict, but can I just take us to, we're obviously talking about big cities where we're based, in terms of your organizations, but can I just take us to kind of, the developing countries where, where often there are conflicts that are happening around the world, and a lot of women are on the periphery, and they're often invisible, and they get no security at all. They don't have access to security in terms of their personal well-being, and we've talked about, domestic violence and gender-based violence and so on. Do you see that changing at all in terms of how we can actually get security out to those places where there are people that will struggle to be able to access security and be protected? Is that something that either of you have a view on?
I mean, I think that's kind of the core of the goal, right? Is in both of our agencies in different ways, and ours, of course, NYPD, despite having an international footprint, is focused on New York City. So our immediate day-to-day, although it still applies to making sure that the policing that we do in communities that are under-resourced, they have access to safety. And that's fundamentally at the core of what we do, not just for women, but for men, for everybody. And part of that has meant deliberately building bridges to communities throughout the city to say, not only are we here to help you and to protect and to make things better for your community, but also you might want to join our department and do that work yourself. And there I would give a bit of a hat tip to our Community Affairs Bureau, who does so much great work throughout the city, building bridges to communities for both reasons, because it can help our recruitment, because we want our police department to reflect the city, and it does, and that's something we've been very proud of. And also because that puts everybody on the same page in terms of buy-in, and going back to the conversation around securitization, really important that this is a shared endeavor, and not only diversity, demographic, international, gender diversity inside the organization to help it do its job better, but also making sure that the communities that we're protecting and serving feel like part of the security equation, and not that something is being done to them and for them that they may or may not believe in and agree with. So that bridge building outside of our organizations, really important. And even more so in the international context, where you've got these profound structural issues that would inhibit a woman maybe from wanting to self-select into the field. And those are, issues that are quite complicated. But to Jackie's point earlier around people who aren't even trying to do something that actually they could do really well, that could have benefits to their organizations for generations, to the degree that we can help reduce the barriers to entry that might prevent somebody from wanting to join the police or the security services, that's an incredibly worthwhile endeavor.
Thank you. Is there anything you would like to add to that, Jackie, in terms of looking beyond our organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm going to kind of bring this a little bit to the AI space as well, since that's such a challenge worldwide right now. But as we see women in leadership roles, and see people also, who aren't women, thinking more, more purposely about women and things that impact women, I do think that the security of women worldwide should improve. So one example, I don't know if any of you have read the book by Caroline Criado Perez, Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men, but it's about how a lack of data representation impacts decisions about women. So one example that she wrote about that's always stuck with me is how a local government was collecting data to decide where to put new transportation systems. And it ended up leaving out women, not on purpose, but the transportation industry was heavily male dominated. And the survey that they put out was really looking at, where do people work and where do they live? And then just trying to provide transportation between the two. But women are more likely to have to make multiple stops locally that aren't necessarily connected to where they work. So they may need to walk more, or take care of children, drop kids off at school, pick up groceries, care for elders. And a lot of the transportation was not designed for that because the question was wrong. So I think that is an example where if you have representation inside a security organization, or somebody who's just looking out for that role, right, asking the right questions, they may demand that data represents more women and the potential impacts to women on policy decisions. So that's kind of just a little microcosm, but I think that those conversations are happening, including in this forum. But having more awareness of data bias as we move into a world with AI and automated decision making is going to be even more important.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right, and thank you for mentioning the book in terms of Caroline Perez, and that is a very interesting book. And if you haven't read it, I would recommend that you all have a dip in and have a read, because there's some really good examples in there of issues that women and girls face, and some really good ideas in terms of how we might deal with them. So I'm going to squeeze in one more question before I open it to the floor, and that is to stay with AI and technology. And we know that the technology is advancing; it's going to continue to advance. It's going to bring us lots of good things in terms of research, medical research, and so on. And it also brings with it things like cyber terrorism and online inappropriate behaviours and so on. So they're all the things that we're going to have to deal with. So what I'm going to ask you is that, do you think there are enough women involved in the development of AI? And if not, what needs to change and how do we change it in terms of making sure that it works for us?
What an interesting question. And you know, Jackie and I had fun on a panel a few months ago around policy, regulatory regimes trying to rein in AI. And I, for NYPD, have spent a lot of time talking about public safety risks associated with generative AI in particular. And we're now in the beginning of the midst of it with the election in terms of seeing impact of disinformation. That, I mean, of course, this is not new. It's not really the beginning of it at all. It's quite well into it as a conversation. But in the 2024 lead up to November, this is front and center for us here at the NYPD. And no, I don't think there's enough women. I don't think there's enough of anyone involved in the development of these technologies. They've been pretty well segregated is the wrong word, but cabined, right? Because the tech industry in general is quite concentrated, as we all know. And there are some benefits and there are some costs associated with that. And the technology is going to lead to a lot more people being involved. I think very important initiatives around prioritizing young girls' involvement in STEM. And I know that Silicon Valley has put a lot of effort into that. Those are hopefully going to be bearing fruit over the next, 5 to 15 years of having the tech world become a lot more demographically and other measures of diversity. So we need to do more in terms of making sure that the tools that we are contending with because of the negative consequences of their use are being developed by people who can help us navigate those challenges. And I think about my 2 children. I have 2 young boys, and they are already, and I'm sure this is not at all restricted to the fact that they're boys, I just happen to have boys. I already see them being sucked in to the cauldron of the social media world and all of the ills that come from that. And they are 6 and 9. And it is a daily conversation around how we engage with technology and how we receive information and what we put about ourselves onto the internet. And so those conversations around technology and avoiding the harms, but capitalizing on the goods, have to start really young, younger than perhaps we feel like our children are ready to fully understand the issues, because it is at the level of children that the consequences are really being felt. And societally, we need to work much harder and much quicker to try to redress that in the present, near future, and distant future.
No, absolutely. And I think in terms of working with young people, I don't think it's ever too early to start. It's got to be done in the appropriate way and suitable for the level, but I don't think we can start early enough in terms of educating young people. Jackie, any final comments on this question before I open it up?
That's a great question. I think my only, addition is that you don't have to be a developer to be involved with AI. It really does require a multidisciplinary team. So lawyers, ethicists, trainers, facilitators, you need graphic designers, and policy people. So even though women are often underrepresented as machine learning engineers, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a role to play in AI. So that's really all I've got.
Right, thank you both. In terms of we've covered a very wide range of subjects, and I'm now going to open it up to the floor in terms of please come and join the conversation. And I think there's one question in the chat box, but does anybody else have a question that they would like to ask? If you so put your hand up or put it in the chat. If not, while you're thinking, I'll go to our first question, which is from Penny Hooper, and she's saying, I have a question for both. I'm a neurodivergent female working in cybersecurity here in the UK. One of the things, sorry, I've just met my.
Basically, what are your thoughts
one of the things
around?
that I've found I struggle with as a female is the challenges, barriers as a neurodivergent person, particularly being female. What are your thoughts around inclusivity for disabled neurodivergent females in security fields, especially getting into leadership roles?
That's such a great question. I would say you are not alone. There are, and I'm trying to remember what group it was, but there was a group in the United States that it's kind of an outside organization of people who are members of the intelligence community and related fields. And they recently put on a session that was for exactly this topic. So it was for neurodivergent individuals, and it was all to help educate them on some of the benefits of having neurodivergent individuals. So if that community doesn't already exist in the UK, I would consider trying to find others like you and creating some of that community, because there are actually a lot of benefits of being neurodivergent. And I think for me it was really enlightening to hear about those and also hear some about the struggles that people face, because as a leader and somebody who can help make hiring decisions and do mentoring, it's so critical to be able to hear those stories and hear those challenges and also hear the benefits, so that I can keep my eyes and ears open for when I'm on a hiring panel or a promotion panel, to make sure that those people are being represented and really their whole selves and all of their skills are being represented in that forum. So I'm really proud of you for even asking the question, and I think that is really important, is getting that conversation going.
I totally agree. I love this question. I love in general the questions in this chat. They're really great and thoughtful. And I think it goes back to when we talk about having a diverse leadership team or a diverse organization or even a diverse, viewpoint and framework with which we're doing our jobs. It's not just around superficial manifestations of diversity. It's around different brains approaching a problem from different perspectives. So that's an incredible strength that you bring to the table, and really important that people start thinking about it. And I know for the intelligence community, there is an emphasis when you're doing your backgrounding to get into the workplace on personality tests and ways of determining how different people think and approach a problem. And hopefully knowing more about how different brains work allows us to be a lot more deliberate about creating teams that have a diverse set of brains and their diverse set of approaches represented. We do this less disciplined here. We just naturally say, okay, well, this person tends to approach this issue from this perspective and another doesn't. I will say there is a big emphasis, and we've had it at the beginning of our conversation. We all talked about teamwork and relationship building and networking and all of these skills which assume an extroversion and a comfort in a setting of discourse that may not be represented by everybody. And some people work much better less in a team environment and more autonomously. So making sure that we can, as bosses, as leaders, as managers, tap into what makes you thrive as an individual and how you can be paired with somebody who's similarly situated or differently situated, but just do it and know that there are these different approaches to how brains approach problems that collectively make us stronger. We just have to understand what they are. It's quite important. And again, I would applaud both the UK and Australia. I hadn't even heard the term neurodiverse until a couple of years ago. I don't know that it gets as much focus in our spaces here as it does elsewhere, and that's to our detriment. So another good reason that you asked this question.
Thank you, Rebecca. Penny, is there anything you would like to join us and say in terms of response to those thoughts? Okay. Right, there's we've got a question from Rebecca Manson. Would you like to take the floor and ask your question? Are you there, Rebecca?
Me?
Rebecca. No, Rebecca Manson. Rebecca had her hand up.
I'm here.
And I was just trying to invite Rebecca to ask her question, but I think she might have disappeared for the moment, so we'll come back to that in a minute. Are there any other questions? I'll go to the other side, see if there's any other hands up.
Megan.
Megan.
Megan Henson.
Okay, Megan Henson, would you like to take the floor and ask your question?
Sure. So I had posted in the chat, but first of all, I want to say it's wonderful listening to this panel and certainly hearing Jackie, who is one of our alumni here at the University of Tulsa College of Law. You know, we have prospective students that come in wanting to go into a variety of different fields, but oftentimes when you're located in a really small market, you know, i.e. here in the Midwest in the US or a smaller town, it may seem really out of reach for people to enter into this field, especially for women who are already feel that they are not represented and may have a bigger obstacle. So I'm curious kind of what advice you would have for individuals who are concerned about their location and where they're located and perhaps not having the opportunity to go into the security field.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm confident Rebecca is going to have a lot to say on this too. But I think my personal experience, I just hadn't considered that. I was so focused on bioethics and health law. And now that I've been, you know, outside of Tulsa for over 10 years, which I need to go back. I hear it's changed quite a bit. But I really didn't realize how many resources were around when I was there. And I think part of that is because I kind of had blinders on and I wasn't looking. But in the community, you know, there is the traditional law enforcement. So, you know, we've had another student who was a police officer for a time and then went on to go work at State Department. There are still field offices in various different small communities for, you know, federal law enforcement. But there's also, you know, work to be done for the AUSAs. And so for those of you who are outside of the United States, the Department of Justice has deployed attorneys in many like mid-sized and larger towns that help represent the federal government. So there's programs there as well. And I really hadn't considered any of those when I was there, but I would also, you know, say the importance of mentoring and getting people connected with others. Like I'm always happy to talk to law students. I do that all the time. I also teach at American University. So that's really, you know, a passion project, but find people who are willing to take the time and talk about what the real ins and outs are and what the opportunities are. Because they may not be as obvious, but they're there. Great question.
Totally agree. It's really important to remember that local government and local space is so important and impactful as a career. And I also was thinking internationally as I was growing up, and that was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is a very small town. but always assumed that I would be working for an international organization. And before I went to law school, I worked for the OECD and I worked for international policy think tanks. So I was thinking federally and I was thinking overseas. And it would never, like Jackie, in a way, our stories are sort of similar. It would never have occurred to me in a million years. I don't have any family members who are in policing that I would be working for the NYPD, and everybody in my community in Santa Fe was quite surprised when that's what I chose as a career path. So local government, that's because for all the reasons that I described earlier, but ultimately, even though it's a giant brand and has an international footprint, it's a local municipal law enforcement agency. And that may not be the path that the students that you're teaching and advising want to take in terms of police work, but working for a local DA's office, how incredibly exciting and fascinating to deal with problems at their genesis and, you know, really hands-on. I think that's the way the world is orienting. And you see at a giant structural level, authority and power devolving closer and closer to the ground for good and for bad in a lot of different ways. And so it can be particularly exciting to feel like, oh, I am going to be working on the community I protect. And not everything is happening at the federal level and international level. There's a lot of really important work. It's a great way to start. And then, of course, you build your networks. And if you decide after working for the DA's office for a few years, you want to go and do something else,
Those are my favorites too.
you'll have some good
So how can I like
do that.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. We've got some more questions in the chat, but I'm also conscious, and I'm going to say this up front. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, incorrectly. Is it Fisayomi?
It's fine. Good afternoon, it's Fisayomi.
Good afternoon. Please have the floor and let us hear your question.
Yes, my name is Fisayomi. Thank you so much, Jackie and Rebecca and Security Women, for putting this webinar together. My question was placed in the chat, but I guess it wasn't asked. It's more around, because I heard when the conversation was going on and saying more women would remove themselves from applying for opportunities because they feel they are not qualified. My question is more around people who are early career starters, because I think the narrative is changing with women wanting to apply. That's my opinion, because I'm from the younger generation. We are high risk takers. But for joining something like the security force, I heard when Rebecca and Jackie said that they had some experience, they had some background experience before. What would you say to a young person who is just coming into the field and is interested in crafting a career here, but has little or no experience? Because sometimes you see all of these opportunities, applications will tell you to just apply for them. And by the time you apply, the application gets shoved out because you probably do not have the experience, no matter how well packaged you put your transferable skills or even just your educational certifications. So how do we navigate some of those?
Well, Jackie said so compellingly her own path to get into CIA, which was not exactly what you would think of. And I had also a somewhat unorthodox path into the NYPD. The problem is, you know, getting to the point where you're talking to somebody, and that's really the challenge, because at the point of the conversation, it's quite easy, even if you don't have experience substantively in the field. When we're doing interviews with prospective candidates, particularly on the intelligence analysis side, we're not necessarily looking to see if you know all of the foreign terrorist organizations and how they operate, and you can rattle off major incidents that have happened over the last decades or whatever it is. We're really trying to understand how you work and how you think and how you approach problems and confront challenges. And the skills we're looking for are often around critical thinking, being innovative and entrepreneurial, being inclusive, communicating effectively. So those are skills that are quite transportable from one field to another. The problem, though, is in a lot of big organizations do have, going back to our technology discussion, screening of resumes. And so if you're screening out resumes automatically before they're even getting in front of the table, we might be losing access to some amazing prospective people. And putting the intel piece aside and going to the policing piece, we've had a huge problem at the NYPD, but replicated across the country, of declines in recruitment and trouble with retention. Especially over the last 4 years, the policing field has taken a reputational hit, and people are cognizant of the physical dangers and some of the other tricky parts about working in police. So we really need those people who may not have had experience, who nonetheless would be great. And so we are kind of actively trying to make sure in our bureau that there aren't people we're overlooking because they don't classically fit what we would describe as qualified. I mean, I would argue that our best people are just those who didn't necessarily have a strong background substantively in the field. So how do you describe your qualifications, and how do you design your job posting in a way that isn't so regimented and narrow that you're filtering out people you should be including? That's a conversation for a lot of different parts of an agency to make sure they're tackling with together. For you as an applicant, I say just keep doing it, keep applying. And these kinds of forums where you say, oh, I met this person, reach out to that person. Say I listened to a talk, or, you know, there's ways that you can, independent of just throwing your hat in the ring in a formal sense, try to get to know the people who are in the places that have jobs that you might be interested in, and have the human element in addition to the resume element.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. And I think having that human element is really important. But there's, depending on where you are, there may or may not also be, networks that are, around the intelligence community that you can join. It may be, through, a women's network. It may be through, whatever your background is, through a professional organization. So sometimes things happen. So you're from the UK. So yeah, I mean, I would see if there's groups like Security Women and other organizations where you'll have access to people, and they'll be thinking about you too once because if you can get in an organization and they can learn about you, when a job comes up that they hear about, they might say, hey, I know somebody who should apply for that. So the personal approach is so important. Like, I never, ever would have applied for CIA if I didn't know somebody who worked there and who I trusted to vouch for it being a good place to work. Because to me, I mean, and some of that's just because I didn't know anything about it. But I also was afraid to move across the country for a job when I had a perfectly good one already lined up where I was. So that personal approach is important on so many levels.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we try and round up all the questions. So I'm going to just look at the questions in the chat box, and I'm going to come to you, Gabriella. Just so as if you make a mental note of the questions, maybe either of you could pick up on them. But Erin is asking, she's wondering how you battle cynicism when you may be exposed to many people trying to commit crimes or harm others. And then we go on, and Beth is asking, what do you think is the responsibility of women to encourage other women to join security intelligence sector? Or perhaps does that responsibility only seek to add to the burden of women who are already having to fight other battles that men don't have to? Which is an interesting one. And then I think that's Brenda
the other ones
has to
Barbara,
head out. Yes,
Barbara, I think the other ones are more about recruitment, which I think have actually, or looking at early stage career, they've been answered already.
Yes,
so I think if you could answer those two about the cynicism one,
yes,
and about women, and then
can I just ask Gabriella to ask her question, please, so that we don't lose sight of it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. My God, it's been extraordinary hearing from all of you. Quick and sharp. I'm a community support officer in the UK. I support the Latin American community, especially residents who overstay in the country. come with their young children. What I challenge is, how can we make sure that our education system gives the same opportunity to these young women, girls, boys? Because I have a challenge. On a daily basis, if they come to the country over 16, 17 years, they are not able to join to a college because they don't have papers. So as a UN Women UK, I challenge speakers to talk about it. How can we support individuals who do not have the right to remain and work in some countries? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabriella. Okay, so can I ask both of you to pick up on which of those questions you would like to give us some insight to in terms of what your thinking is?
I will pick up because I have to pop off a couple minutes early to deal with something. But this has been such a great conversation. And again, you guys are such a thoughtful audience. I wish we could be here in person. And I think all of those themes are quite actually symbiotic, because the cynicism question, really interesting, excellent question, really would be easy in some ways to get depressed and cynical, because we're all day, every day mired in such atrocity, whether it's physical atrocities or online vitriol, and it can create a somewhat dark view of humanity if you spend your day dealing with people at their worst. But to me, it's actually why I do the job, and I find it very inspiring, and it's an daily, hourly, minute by minute reminder of the importance of doing the work that we do in the way that we do it. Because it's true, there are people who want to do harm. There aren't very many of them, which is one good thing that I've learned over the years. Most people don't. Most people want to do good. And for those that want to do harm, that's why we're here. So feeling like you have the ability to move the needle and to see the fruits of your labor doing that is endlessly rewarding for me personally. And I do think that women are obligated to help other women. And that may not be fair, or it might pose a burden. I agree with Jackie's response in the chat. I find it quite rewarding, not just to help women, to help all younger people who are coming into this field. There's nothing that makes me happier. I teach also up at Columbia, which is up the street from us here in New York. And there's nothing better than dealing with people who are younger and their questions and their issues and their framework, and having those conversations. It's tremendously energizing, and you feel like you're giving back. I think if you chose this profession, it's because you want to give back to your communities, your country. And these are ways to do it, to not get cynical and to help others join the field. And as to the question about getting women and girls access to education, this is an issue we're dealing with quite a bit at the moment in New York, from migrant communities coming into the city. And if we don't, just going back to kids and technology, if we don't get kids in education and you want to absorb new people into your cities, which we're going to be doing a lot more of over the years to come, well, then we're going to be in for it. So we need to be doing that kind of work and thinking very creatively and strategically about getting different voices able to access the resources that we all were so lucky to have had, which helped propel us into our own careers. So it's a very complicated world we live in, and one that we need more women to help us work through together. But it's been a real pleasure, and I hate to leave early.
I was going to say, I know you're going to be popping off now, so can I ask everybody to say thank you to Rebecca for joining us today, and we've been a brilliant hour and a half. I've learned so much, and I'm sure all of you have. And I look forward to continuing our conversation, Rebecca, over time. And I hope our paths cross again at some point.
Absolutely. And over to Jackie to close it on out.
Yes.
No
Thank
pressure.
you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
very
Rebecca.
much, Rebecca.
Bye.
So
Okay,
I don't have too much to add.
Over to you, Jackie, for the final thoughts.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to what Rebecca said so well. I think, I do want to point to some of the programs that CIA has been putting into place for well-being and making sure that there's resources for the workforce on what that means, whether it is you actually taking care of your health or your mental health, or making time to, be mindful, to work out things like that. Our organization has been putting a lot of resources into the workforce. And it's not only for that reason, but I think that it's also to create that, that platform, and that expectation for people that we are taking care of ourselves, because if we take care of ourselves, we can take care of our people and take care of our mission. So if you don't already have something like that in your organization, and you have the opportunity to advocate for one, I would certainly consider that. But I think that that's a best practice that I'm hoping to see replicated in other organizations.
Yes, no, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Jackie, on that one, that it's important that organizations have mechanisms and infrastructure in place that looks after the well-being of their staff and keeps them happy. Because if you've got a happy, well looked after staff, then the employees, then the whole, the job that we're all doing, well, we're all doing different jobs, but we do it better. And I think it's so important that people come to work and are able to feel happy at work, because it's a big chunk of our lives, and I've always thought that. So thank you for that. I think on that note, we're going to draw this to a close, and I'd like to thank Jackie for joining us today and for her time and all the invaluable experience that she has shared with us. So can I say a big thank you to Jackie? And I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today, and I hope you know there is something that you've heard today that you can take away. But at the same time, I think we all ought to go away and think about what one thing can we do in terms of a contribution to try and change the world of security, and perhaps encourage another young person to think about a career in security. But I also believe that all of us as women who are successful, whether it be security or in any other organized type, organization, service or business, whatever, we all have a responsibility, however hard our jobs are, however busy we are, we all have a responsibility to make sure we look behind us and make sure that we bring other women and young people with us in terms of building their careers and their futures. I think that's the way we will make sustainable change happen. So that's something that we do all have to be mindful of. Is there anything, Juliet, you would like to add or say?
I'd say here, Barbara. Thank you very much for your wonderful questioning, and our two fantastic speakers. Jackie, thank you very much indeed. And I'd just say that the recording will be on the NGO CSW platform, but also we are going to put the recording on the Security Women website. So if you want to listen again, or if you only heard a bit of it, it will be there.
Or share it with others.
Yes.
And I hope that you'll all stay in touch with us through our website and our app and our social media and whatever. And that when we do things in the future, we'll see you all again, because it's been great seeing you today.
Yes, and thank you for the wonderful questions.
Yes. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon. Bye.
And you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.